Good evening, everybody. I believe we are live. You can let me know, though, as you hop on. Please say hi. I'm 2 minutes early because I want to start at 6 p.m. sharp because we have a lot to get through today. So, I have to look good for everyone, or as good as I can look under conditions like this. Okay, I'm gonna start in exactly 1 minute, so as people hop on, please say hi. We have a lot to get through. Drinking my reishi tea and my collagen because we learned all about how collagen and glycine protects our cells and helps with detoxification and reduces inflammation and supports immunity, didn't we? Hey Julian, glad you could make it. If you can stay on, I think you're going to really enjoy this group call. Carla, hi. Stephanie, hi. Heba, hello. I hope you can stay on. Jennifer, hi. Carla, Roman has not stopped talking about your salted caramel pretzels since last week. Keeps annoying me to get him some more. Jolene, hi. Janelle, Janelle, thank you for the compliment, but honestly, I don't feel great. And Jordan, hi. This smoke is kicking my ass. I do everything I recommend to people. I actively do it, and I would be lying if I was saying that it still didn't affect me. It totally does. My eyes are burning. I have neuroinflammation. Reminder, what is neuroinflammation? We'll get into it in a few minutes. I'm so dehydrated. I'm finishing up some electrolytes. Had San Pellegrino. I had chlorophyll, vitamin C. I have a tea. I had dandelion tea. And now when you do teaching like this, it takes so much brain energy that if I don't die during this call, we will all be surprised because my brain is already like, it's just a smoke. Because I've spoken before, in case you don't remember, we've still got a few seconds, that I have hypothyroidism, but I don't have the symptoms because I obviously manage it quite well. But when I get exposed to toxins like in the atmosphere now, I feel it, and I can feel the inflammation around my neck. Now the chlorophyll helps a lot, so does the magnesium. So I take a magnesium citrate malate blend, so both help bind to heavy metals. Like everything helps, but I feel it. So which is going to lead us directly into tonight. I'm going to try not overwhelm you. If at any stage it gets overwhelming or confusing, write it in the comments and I'll pull myself back a bit. But I want to really help you connect the dots on how everything influences everything in the body. And this comes up a lot when I do consultations. Believe it or not, I have a lot of nurses and practitioners and even some doctors that I work with out of Foothills. I keep telling them, you need to get me in there to do some talks to your people. But as much as they understand the body, they don't quite understand the different influences. And then when I talk to general population people, even nutritionists and dietitians, even fitness instructors, they don't quite understand how everything is so intertwined, and everything right from what you see influences different functions and systems in your body. So I want to get into that as best as I can in an hour. I'm going to try cover as much as I can. So I have a list. If you see me look down here, it's just so I'm staying on point. I don't actually have a script. I never have scripts. I just kind of wing it. But I do try to stay on topic with some lists of what I want to cover. So I'm going to try kind of go from top to bottom. I think that's the best approach to have. Maybe spend a couple of minutes on each part as we go through. So starting with the brain, I get a lot of complaints about the brain. Now, if any of you guys want to get into anything else around the head, like hair loss or skin issues or anything, put it in the comments. I'll try squeeze it in at the end. I'm just going to stick to what I have right now. So when we look at the brain, loads of complaints and comments about brain fog and poor memory recall and poor cognitive performance. And what does poor cognitive performance mean? It basically means that your brain is not as sharp as it used to be. You don't understand things the way you used to. You don't retain information like you used to. When you read something, you might have to read it 4 or 5 times before you even get part of it. So that your brain just doesn't perform like it used to. There's so many things that are going to influence our brain. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but of course we have the blue light. Like, it was a necessity for me to wear these tonight because of the neuroinflammation I have. Direct sunlight directly influences your brain in a positive way. Smoke. A lot of the chemicals in the air that we can't see right now, but we are inhaling and we're even absorbing through our skin and our mouth, a lot of those chemicals cross the blood-brain barrier. So there's a lot of things that influence our brain and can cause this neurodegeneration or neuroinflammation, where we start to mess shit up. We start to kill off the brain cells. We start to mess up the neuroconnectivity. So these connective proteins and strands, they start to break. So you don't get the signaling anymore. Unless you're actively practicing to try keep a healthy brain and build new brain cells, you're slowly going to lose those brain cells as you get over. And even the brain density we see in subjects that were dead before their brains were studied, that their brain tissue, the mass, the density, the fluid content, it starts to degrade and decrease as they get older. So neuroinflammation is basically what a lot of people are experiencing, and we'll feel it in different ways. So when someone comes to me for help and on a consultation or our first few conversations, they'll mention a lot of, oh, I have brain fog. I can't think the way I used to. I don't remember stuff. And that's basically their version of brain fog, until many of you will agree with me, until you start to get healthier and you feel cleaner and you reduce the inflammation. Then you start to recognize, well, I actually had other symptoms, but I didn't recognize it because I was so used to feeling that way. I didn't even notice a difference. But for sure, people generally will recommend the brain fog and just not being sharp there anymore. And it really is like a fog. So this is your neuroinflammation. Whereas others who maybe are more in tune with their body, more aware, or as I say, you've cleaned up your body. So now when you do get exposed to toxins, you feel it a lot more. You're more sensitive and more aware. Kind of like we all feel great during the week when we eat clean. And then when we have something on the weekend, most of us feel gross on Saturday because we're more sensitive to these toxins, and your brain is included in this because a lot of these toxins, they do cross the blood-brain barrier. Now, back in the day, less and less stuff did cross this barrier that separates your brain from the rest of your body because it was never as permeable as it is now. And we didn't have as many molecules that were able to cross the blood-brain barrier, like glyphosate. Glyphosate only started to come onto the scenes back in the 1960s, and even back then, it was still a lot lower in levels in our atmosphere than it is now. But glyphosate actually, not only does it cross the blood-brain barrier, but it helps carry aluminum, or aluminium as we say in Ireland, across the blood-brain barrier. So we have a lot more exposure to stuff now. Hydrogenated fats, trans fats. How many of you knew, and I'm sure some of you did because I've said it before, many of you knew that our hydrogenated and trans fats, they are made by running mercury through them. They contain mercury, and mercury crosses the blood-brain barrier. So these foods, these greasy foods, or foods that have got hydrogenated or trans fats or toxic fats in them, they also contain heavy metals. So not only are you getting the inflammatory issues that these hydrogenated and bad fats cause, you're also then getting the heavy metals as well in them too. And there could be more, because it depends on how it's manufactured, it depends on the container, it depends on what else they're adding into that recipe or that food. So now we have a lot more stuff coming from all angles that influences our brain. So neuroinflammation, for some of us that are used to being very clean in our body, then we have an overload of sugar or takeout or greasy foods or smoke in the air, whatever it is. And I'm pointing up there because there's a window up there, in case you're like, why does she keep pointing the sky? So when we get exposed to this, now our symptoms can be even worse. So we feel, and how I describe this neuroinflammation that I feel, and a lot of people feel, I think, Carla, you've expressed this too, is you almost feel like your brain is swollen and it's trying to push out of your cranium, and your eyes are dry. Like my eyes are super dry now. Your mouth will be dry. You'll struggle. I was speaking to someone earlier and I was struggling to get the words out, and I was like, oh my God, I need my coffee. So I couldn't pull the words out of my head. Now I can still perform, but I'll struggle with certain words because the connectivity is struggling. So that's neuroinflammation. I've even said before, when I get that neuroinflammation, I'll get warm and I'll feel like I'm flushed, like I have a temperature, but I don't. Or I might get like some tension in my neck. And sometimes I've even heard, as strange as this is, my heartbeat in my ears because of the inflammation. It's just all swollen. So there's a lot of things that can cause this, apart from these external environmental toxins. Like I mentioned, we've got the trans fats, we've got these hidden heavy metals. Maybe you've got amalgam fillings. I had mine removed, and although I didn't go to a biological dentist to get them removed, the girl that did them, she was well versed and she understood what I was talking about, and I was sure to load up on like activated charcoal and cilantro. I had morellite clay, I had chlorophyll. Like I was making sure, like, if I'm getting these out, I gotta bind, because not only are you swallowing some of it, but the fumes, you're inhaling them as well. So anyway, those are exposures too. Sugar is an exposure. All these crappy fats, not to kind of go on about beat this horse to death kind of thing, all these crappy fats, they are hydrogenated to make them like that. But also a big one, of course, and I'm going to move on, and if you feel like I'm rushing ahead, please stop me. So a big influencer of poor cognitive performance or brain issues or degeneration of the brain, apart from what we all know, I'm sure many people have heard of Alzheimer's. Some people refer to it as type 3 diabetes. Honestly, that term seems to be hit and miss in the kind of researchers, scientific realm. Health professionals say, yeah, type 3 diabetes, and in some aspect it is, but in some areas there's a lot of researchers that don't agree with that term, and even some doctors. But regardless, you have Alzheimer's, you have dementia, you even have Parkinson's, we have degeneration of the central nervous system with MS. Like, there's a lot out there, and we know that nutrition plays a huge part in that. And even when you don't go that far, when just looking at anxiety, many of us have anxiety, and me and Carla, we've spoke about this a lot. We're well able to narrow down what's causing our anxiety, and usually for us too, it's business stress or nutrition or sleep, depression, like any mental health issues you're being attacked from every angle. But one angle that people don't consider is going to be sleep. And from here, I'm going to lead on to the next thing. So sleep is huge for many reasons. If you're not caught up on the podcast or you don't remember some of them, go through them again. I did a whole podcast on the sleep phases and stages of sleep. That was pretty good to help you understand each stage. So if you're not sleeping and you're not going through each of these stages or phases of sleep, you're going to have a real problem. So the first thing is, when you go asleep, your brain shrinks by 60%. This allows then your brain to do its own detoxification processes. And these processes, they really happen during deep and REM sleep, especially REM sleep. REM sleep is where we detoxify a lot of our deuterium. Those of you caught up on deuterium is a real problem. But these happen in deep and REM sleep. So if you're not getting into these stages of sleep, then you're not going to be doing your detoxification. So your brain is going to maintain a lot of these chemicals and plaque buildup and inflammatory molecules from whatever the day threw at you and stress. You're not going to be clearing them up or detoxifying them if you're not getting into your deep and REM sleep. So for someone who tosses and turns a lot during the night and doesn't get into deep sleep because they can be stuck in light sleep, either due to anxiety or external factors like snoring, dogs, noise outside. Even I've noticed the lighter mornings, because your skin has receptors that can wake me up earlier, or a stressor. Yesterday morning I woke up at 5 and I was like, why am I awake? And then I realized, like a few hours later, shoot, that was the smoke. My body picked up that was a stress while I was asleep, because I woke up and the house was full of smoke, and that woke me up. Kind of like internal alarm bells. So because I had woken up an hour early, that took a huge chunk of my REM sleep away from me, because the biggest chunk of our REM sleep happens later in the morning. That's why we can remember dreams better as soon as we wake up, because that's our biggest REM cycle. But that's where we do the majority of that detoxification and flushing of the brain. So if you're not getting into sleep, you're really going to have a lot of these cognitive performance issues. You're going to have a lot of brain tiredness and fatigue and can't recall, and just feeling like that inflammation, that neuroinflammation, irritability, and just fed up and anxiety, and just, I'm going to say fed up again because I feel fed up. So what other things that happen, apart from the inflammation detoxification aspect of things when you're asleep, not only do you get into the whole fat burning aspect, and a big part of that is in your brain, because your brain uses the most amount of energy generally. The brain uses approximately 30% of your daily caloric needs each day. So 30% of your energy expenditure comes from your brain. And that's an average. People who don't use their brain a lot, let's say they just scroll through social media and watch a lot of TV. I'm not talking about anyone specific, and just trying to give you an idea. They don't use their brain a lot, they probably lose less. People that teach, read a lot of books, do mathematics, do stuff that demands a lot from their brain, a lot of decision making, they can use a lot more energy. But 30%, still quite a large amount. So when you're asleep, I spoke about this maybe last week on one of the videos. If you think of, you basically have a cup of glucose, a cup of sugar in your head, and that's your petrol tank for the day. And as that day goes on, this petrol tank decreases. Sugar is your brain's preferred fuel source. It just is the end. Sugar is fast, it gives fast energy. Your brain prefers sugar. So you have this fuel tank full of sugar, but as the day goes on, and the more demands, the more decisions you make, the more annoyance you get, that petrol tank depletes. So by the time you go to bed, your petrol tank should be empty. Now, this is the petrol tank in your brain. I'm not talking about your full body. It should be empty, so then by the time you go to sleep, it's like, okay, great. You're basically going to the gas station for a service when you go to sleep. You're getting everything fine-tuned and fixed for the next journey or the next day. That includes refilling your gas tank. Yeah, I said petrol, gas, same thing. So when you go asleep, this is where that gas tank or petrol tank that refills. So your brain's glycogen stores refill when you're asleep. So great, you wake up in the morning, you're sharp. We learn best first thing in the morning. My best hours to learn are between 6 and 8 a.m. I'm sharp, I can think, I can retain. I understand things better early in the morning. Not that I don't understand things, but I know I'm sharper first thing in the morning. So you refill, you go into work, you're able to make decisions, you're able to shout at the kids, you're able to create loads of content, do lots of stuff. And then as the day goes on, it depletes again and everything's great. So, but what happens if you don't sleep? If you don't sleep, things become harder. You don't refill that gas tank. Maybe not even a quarter. So let's say you half fill the gas tank. The next morning you get up and you use whatever reserves you have in that gas tank. And now by 1 p.m. the gas tank is empty. And now you're starting to crash and you're feeling fatigued. Maybe you want to sleep. But you can't. Your brain needs to function. It needs to survive. So it sets you off on high alert. And you get increased cravings for sugar because your brain is like, hey, I want sugar, 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 and that becomes then survival mechanism. And it's very hard to outdo survival drives or mechanisms. Now, some people have mammoth discipline. Like Rhonda and here, I've seen her stay very disciplined on almost no sleep. Some people can, and I've done it too. I can say to myself, goals, 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 you know what you want. But then there's other days where I'm like, I'm exhausted, I'm so tired, I just need sugar. Part of me knows I should just go for a nap, but the other part of me gives into the sugar. But this is what happens. So if you're not sleeping properly, you're going to get the higher instance of cravings, especially for sugar, as the day goes on. And sure, you've no energy for willpower, so there's just no willpower there. That's gone. And as well, like if you're not getting the anti-inflammatory effects of the deep sleep, then of course you have an increase in insulin resistance. I think there was a study done about 2 decades ago, probably about 20 years ago, and it basically showed 1 night of poor sleep made you 9 times more likely to become type 2 diabetic or something like that, because there's a big correlation between poor sleep and insulin resistance. So I just want to check everyone can still hear me. Hopefully you can still hear me. And I'm not just talking to myself. So that's really important to understand. So that part of your brain is going to directly influence all the other parts of your brain. Because if your brain starts slowing down, now we move down. If your brain starts slowing down and starts saying to your body, I'm in survival mode, I'm stressed, panic, all hands on deck kind of thing, then the body can start to get stressed. Uh-oh, there's something wrong here. The brain is stressed. We're not functioning. Are we at a shortage of food? What's going on? Are we dying? So then that then has an influence on your metabolism, and the metabolism will start slowing down because the metabolism's like, oh, the brain's in survival mode. What's going on here? Maybe I should reserve too. So now I'm going to slow down so I'm not burning through my energy so quickly. And I'm going to start kind of holding on to all these calories. And sure, if I need to, if danger does come or I get a big stress response, I'm going to send a signal down the body to the liver and the adrenals to make sugar and make more energy, aka more fat, because chances are you're not going to use it. But that then influences, so you got your metabolism. That, of course, is going to influence your thyroid. So then we start to see hypothyroid issues start. So people that don't sleep very well, we know, apart from the brain issues, we start to see them have hypothyroid issues and adrenal issues, but we'll get to that as we go down. I did just mention the adrenals there, so I just want you to remember that your adrenals and your thyroid, they're basically like sisters that live far apart, kind of like me and my sister, but they're sisters. So when one reacts one way, it influences the other directly. So your thyroid directly influences your adrenals and vice versa. So now your thyroid starts to slow down. And now this is going to start not only affecting like how you feel, it's going to start affecting constipation. So one of the biggest indicators or symptoms, I don't know what's going on at my top, one of the biggest symptoms of hypothyroidism is constipation. That is one of our biggest symptoms. Most people think, when they think of hypothyroidism, hair loss, eyebrow loss, cold, fatigue, maybe skin issues, eczema, psoriasis and stuff, but constipation really is that biggest indicator. And you can see the metabolism slow right down. And if someone, let's say, is very fit and in shape, and they start to experience this kind of chronic stress and their hypothyroid alarms start going off, you can even see their metabolism slow down even more. You'll see it on HRV and their resting heart rate and their calorie expenditure, even through like metabolic breath tests. You can visually see this happens. So when you're not working on up here, it's going to start moving its way down here, and your thyroid directly influences everything: your hormones, your sex hormones, your immune system. The easiest way to explain thyroid issues is you just feel rubbish. With adrenal issues, you just don't feel yourself. You feel discombobulated. I'm not feeling myself. But when you have thyroid issues, you're like, I feel rubbish. Like, I feel just terrible. Nothing is working. Everything's wrong. And some people will experience a lot of hair loss. Some people won't. Not everyone has the same symptoms. But that's going to influence that. So as you start to move down now, as the brain is stressed, the thyroid is stressed, the metabolism is stressed, now we start getting this stress response as we move down. This stress response, and this really is to drive home, like, everything influences, and I'm going to kind of branch off on a few things I say, but I'm going to try just keep pushing down. Now we start looking at, okay, the lungs and the heart. So the heart first, you start getting a lot of stress around the heart. Now what do we see? The heart maybe not pumping as well. Maybe we start to see the tissues of the heart muscle and the arteries, they start to get inflamed. Maybe those arteries start to shrink. So then the pressure builds up. You start getting blood pressure issues. You start looking like, of course, this stress response is going to have an inflammatory cascade. Like, it's not just an inflammatory response, it's an inflammatory cascade right through the whole body. So the tissues become inflamed, the blood vessels, the capillaries, the arteries, they become inflamed. But not only that, the blood becomes inflamed. Your blood can get very sticky and gluggy. So think of blood clots, but that's where it starts to clot. But before that stage, before it starts to clot and solidify and stick together, before that it can kind of be like sludge, very gluggy and slow moving and thicker. You can get thick blood. So at that stage, not only do you have the arteries start to tighten up because of the inflammation, now the arterial tunnels are smaller because they're inflamed, they start to squash. Now you've got this stickier inflamed blood, that kind of like sludge is trying to push through, and now you get a lot of blood pressure issues. And now you have the propensity for stroke or cutting off the blood flow to your brain and your central nervous system. Obviously, that's concerning. You also then are at higher risk of that plaque build up within your arteries as well. There's many things that can influence this, but honestly, the biggest influencer of plaque and cholesterol, it is stress. It's stress. As much as people like to vilify fat when we start to look at cholesterol issues are not necessarily because you're eating foods containing cholesterol. It's because your liver is making the extra cholesterol, and generally that is because of stress. If you remember a few weeks ago in I think our second group call, and that video is on YouTube for you all to catch up on, at the end of that call, so even if you've only got time, scroll to the last 10 minutes and I went through the steroidal stress pathway. Actually, I think on Instagram I posted a 2-minute audio clip just going really fast through that, so check that out. So cholesterol issues are mostly driven by stress. It's not necessarily the cholesterol that you're eating, but there is a tiny factor where nutrition is involved, and it's not again necessarily cholesterol. It's usually more so sugar, because we convert sugar into these fatty acids. So if we have too much sugar in our diet and you're not burning it up because you're not an Olympic athlete or doing CrossFit 8 hours a day, that excess sugar has to get converted into some sort of fatty acid to be stored. And generally that's going to be triglycerides or cholesterol. And a lot of people don't understand that. So the biggest drivers of cholesterol issues and triglycerides and LDL and HDL and all that is going to be stress first and sugar second. Alcohol can play a part because alcohol turns off how we metabolize sugar and fat. But generally, just to kind of leave this at this, it's going to be that stress and sugar is going to be driving cholesterol. So then we have the inflammation around the heart and even the chest, and people can feel really tight and tense. So much stress, so much inflammation. Then we move on to the lungs, and the lungs, even if you're not fighting some sort of virus or pathogen, the lungs, the bronchioli, they can get very inflamed. And now you start getting more sensitive to environmental toxins. There's a lot of doctors and researchers out there that propose asthma is not actually a real, quote, illness. It's not a real thing. It's actually the inflammatory response from all these toxins we're exposed to. So it's not like you're born with asthma, even though I know a lot of small kids are. It's just they are born with a lot more inflammation and sensitivities because of this inflammation. Obviously, like, we could debate on different things and there's a lot to be considered, but I'm more talking about how everything influences everything. So now you've got this cascade of inflammation stemming from the brain stem or brain cells, and that then is going down right through your body, including into your lungs. So now those bronchioli and the proteins and the immune cells, the T cells, the white cells in your lungs, they're struggling already. So now you might get exposed to a virus. Why do you think people who have a lot of stress in their life, they get sick a lot more than people who don't? People who have a lot of inflammation in their body for whatever reason, bad diets, sleep habits, They get sick a lot more than people who don't, because they're constantly in this inflammatory, stressed, all hands on deck kind of state. So now not only is the immune system weaker, but it's already compromised because it's already being used to fight other things, put out this fire. If for those of you that didn't know, translated in Latin, inflamed means to set on fire. So your body is basically on fire. So now you're more compromised. Remember what they were saying through the whole pandemic is people who were immunocompromised, they were going to be more susceptible to getting really sick or having severe outcomes. And part of it was this, is because their immune system was already trying to put out all these fires and deal with all these issues. So that inflammation, as you're seeing, and probably why I speak so much about it, like so much, I'm like a broken record. They could probably make some sort of remix track on me saying inflammation all the times I do, is because it influences everything so much, right down to the cancer cell. We see a big inflammatory component there. Now, what's driving the inflammation can be different things, but generally most issues, most age-related issues, wrinkles, hair loss, because someone was asking me about hair loss the other day, everything can come down to inflammation. Heavy bleeding, blood clots, menstrual pain, inflammation. Like nearly everything is inflammation, as you're learning. Stroke, inflammation is at the root of that. So, but again, different things will drive this inflammation. So as we move down then, of course, the liver and the kidneys, right now they have a lot to deal with the kind of environmental toxins we're being exposed to right now. Not a lot of people know this. Have a good night at work, Jordan. Not a lot of people know this, but your kidneys filter every ounce of your blood every hour. Actually, it's under an hour. It ranges from 40 to 50 minutes. But your kidneys literally filter your blood, so clean your blood up to 400 times a day in 24 hours. That's a lot of work your kidneys are doing. Your liver, of course, is our major detoxification filtration system. The liver has so much. The liver doesn't only filter and clean the body, but the liver also does a lot of conversion, like converting glucose into cholesterol. But also the liver converts hormones. The liver converts T4 into T3. T4 and T3 can also get converted in the peripheries at different target sites, but the liver does a lot of that conversion for us. So if you're having liver inflammation, all of these processes are not going to happen properly because the liver is not going to be able to function. It's not going to convert. You're going to have a misconnection there. You're going to have a buildup of fatty acids within the liver where they shouldn't be, and we start to see fatty liver start to come about. And when you see fatty liver, and even cholesterol and triglycerides, like it can work vice versa. If you've got fatty liver, chances are you have cholesterol and triglyceride issues. If you have cholesterol and triglyceride issues, you can assume you have some sort of fatty liver, even if your doctor says you haven't, because as many of us know now, doctors won't give you a set or specific diagnosis until you're at the end stages of things looking bad. So if they, for example, look at your liver and it looks half full of fat, so it'll look more solid, the shading will be different. On an ultrasound, they'll say, no, you're fine. But you're like, well, I've half fatty liver. Can you not diagnose me with half fatty liver? But it's until they reach a certain point that they're not going to give you that diagnosis. So once the liver and kidneys start to get inflamed, you start to see a lot of these problems creep up. Even gallbladder issues, bile issues. What is bile when it starts causing a problem? Well, it's inflamed bile. It's not emulsifying properly. It's starting to not pick up things properly, and it becomes sticky and gluggy like the rest of our blood does. I have a client. He struggles with gout, and it goes into, we had it in remission, but what started happening now is since April, he started having pain in his feet again. And believe me, he does molecular hydrogen, he does all the nutrition. Like, these people, they're so good. It's a husband and wife I work with. And he's great. But he started running again in April. Whereas he hadn't been. He was doing more kind of weights and elliptical and stuff like that. Well, he started doing these long runs, and now his feet, his gout starts acting up in his feet, and it hurts a lot because you basically got these crystals or shard of glass cutting into your feet. And I was like, well, what changed? Like, I know you guys were away. Did you have alcohol, this? And they're like, no, the only thing that really has changed is he started running again since April. And it seems to be after every run, his feet start to flare up. Now, apart from the pounding that happens if you run on concrete or a treadmill, like, there's a lot of pounding on the bottom of the feet. There's a lot of impact. But running is very stressful to the body. Running causes a big adrenaline and cortisol response. So that's a big stress response. Running causes a lot of inflammation from the stress response, but also that pounding and pushing your body for so long. So we established that actually the running was causing such a stress response, it was stressing his kidneys and liver even more, and they were struggling to detoxify and filter the uric acid that his body already overproduces. And this is a genetic predisposition, it runs in their family. So he doesn't drink a lot, he doesn't eat a lot of crap. It's just unfortunate that he has this gene expression, but it turned out it ended up being the running. So of course I was like, well, do this is better, blah blah blah. Of course he does inversion every night. Like, when I say these people do everything, they do everything, but this stress inflammatory response is triggering the gout. And I actually was saying to them earlier, well, did you ever wonder why most runners, they have generally really skinny legs and skinny arms, but they usually have a tummy or a belly, and that's that stress response. The cortisol drives the fat into the tummy area. Most of us know, if you have a lot of stress, or at least I hope you guys do, that one indicator of stress is that tummy area. The cortisol will cause you to retain fat around your stomach. Now, there's obviously two different types of fat, but cortisol will cause you to retain fat around your stomach. So while we're here then, because I did mention this in the description. So one thing that happens with stress, a lot of stress, and just to be clear, stress, your body will perceive anxiety as stress. Anxiety is a stress response. Anxiety is generally driven by adrenaline. Adrenaline causes anxiety, that feeling of impending doom, butterflies in your stomach. That's usually adrenaline. Adrenaline is a corticosteroid, which is made from the adrenals, which is a stress hormone. So when we have this anxiety, what we start to see is the rounding of the tummy, but it's a lot harder. We start to see this visceral fat. When I ask people for pictures, it's not just the whole before and after. I specifically say, can I see your side profile? So when you have visceral fat, some people will say, yeah, it's round and hard, and they're pretty good at telling you. Some people, I'll say, well, can you lie down? If you lie down and your stomach stays more protruded, there's a good chance you have visceral fat. If you lie down, your stomach sinks, chances are you don't have a lot of visceral fat. But this visceral fat is the deep fat that wraps around your organs, and it's a lot denser. It's actually denser in mitochondria, or what some people might be familiar with, brown fat. So it is easier to break down, but it takes work, of course, it takes consistency. But this is the damaging, dangerous fat. This is actually, there's a woman I saw a picture of recently, and her upper belly, pretty much starting from her rib cage, so her upper stomach, down to more like her belly button, it was just completely round, and she has got fatty liver. So then this tells me, like, this visceral fat is basically in her whole upper abdominal cavity, and she has fatty liver. So not only is this fat inside the liver, but it's also outside, and chances are it's outside all the other organs, the pancreas, the gallbladder, the whole lot, and it's just pushing everything forward and out and around. This is obviously a big problem, but when I see these side profile pictures, I can see, okay, like, that's definitely visceral fat, like, you can tell. Kind of like men who get these kind of very round, hard pregnancy bellies. A lot of it's from alcohol, but some men who don't drink will still get it from stress. So that kind of very round, hard belly, that is visceral fat. Now, that's a real problem. And one of the biggest drivers of that is going to be stress. Stress, poor diet, the whole lot. But as I posted about the other day, there's some game changers when it comes to visceral fat. Sleep is probably top, as much as people don't like to hear it because people have sleep issues. Sleep is a big influence on visceral fat. The next one I'm going to say would be vitamin D. Firstly, like, the first tier of vitamin D is getting that early sunlight exposure. And when I say early sunlight exposure, there's a specific time frame. The research shows us that between 8 and 10 a.m., that's where you want to get your sunlight exposure. I mean, before, a little before 8, it's not going to be a big problem, especially at this time of the year, because the UV rays we get more kind of the red UV rays earlier in the morning. That's kind of like when you think of sunrise and the sky can be a lot more orange, and the same with sunset. We get more of those red, but those then penetrate into your eyes, into your brain, and that can be very helpful for visceral fat. And then vitamin D supplements, as I posted this morning in this group, and I posted 2 studies. You don't have to read them because I know most of you trust what I say. But I post the studies just in case you doubt me. I'm kidding. Visceral fat and vitamin D3, there's a direct correlation there. So even supplementing with vitamin D can make a big difference there. So vitamin D, not only does it do that, but I had mentioned, how does vitamin D and DHA improve your metabolism? Well, vitamin D is a game changer when it comes to cellular health for many reasons. Like, vitamin D, many of us know, helps us produce serotonin. Serotonin is our feel-good hormone. That's why a lot of specialists will say sunlight and vitamin D, the best tools for anxiety, depression, other mood disorders. Generally, what we see, the consensus is that people who get a lot more outdoor and sunlight exposure, especially earlier in the day, they don't have as much of an instance of mental health issues as people who don't. And I think most people realize, like, after you've had a long walk in the fresh air and the sunshine, you generally feel good. But people lower in vitamin D generally have a lot more mental health issues, and of course we can see how that's going to influence your lifestyle, what you do in regards to exercise or TV or nutrition choices, or giving into cravings, or even just motivation. I don't want to cook, let's get takeout kind of thing. So vitamin D, huge part there. But vitamin D, what happens when we look directly at sunlight, and please stop me if I'm overwhelming people. I'm making my way down. I'm just going to kind of move on from this now in a second. So in our eyes and in our brain, we have DHA metabolic receptors. So metabolic receptors are energy receptors. So most of your eyes and your brain is made up of DHA. Can anyone guess where we get our DHA? I'll give you a second to answer. But when we stimulate these DHA receptors, and not just our eyes and our skin, but most of them are in our eyes and our brain. Sorry, we've got some in our skin too. Most of them are in our eyes and our brain. When we stimulate these receptors with UV light, with sunshine, we then speed up the metabolism. The brain starts to perform better because UV light, sunlight, synergizes with DHA. Let's see, has anyone got it? No, nobody bothered. Okay, we get our DHA from our pure krill oil. It's our best source of DHA, and then your wild salmon and other seafood. So when you hit these DHA receptors, that, to put it really layman's, they'll die if you don't have enough DHA. Like the majority of your brain is made up of DHA. It's a fatty acid. If you don't have enough of this fatty acid in your brain's going to shrivel up like SpongeBob and die. But when you trigger these DHA and these metabolic receptors with sunlight, like I've spoken about, get your sunshine first thing in the morning, because this is going to trigger your master clock, which is kind of behind here, directly behind your eyes, which is your suprachiasmatic nucleus. You basically ping everything with sunlight, and it revs up the metabolism. It revs up these DHA receptors in your brain. It then signals like the hormonal cascade throughout the day and says, this is the time of the day, let's pulse out loads of cortisol, and as the sun goes down, oh, we don't have the sunlight anymore, let's start to bring in melatonin, unless we decide to watch TV with blue light. Now we're basically getting a fake signal. So everything matters. It all influences the other. You get this ping of sunlight to these receptors that are kept healthy with DHA. That's going to signal the hormonal cascade, so your hormones start to work better and at the proper times. Not only that, it also signals for you to make more hormones. Then the hormones have you feeling good. Then your menstrual cycle starts working better. Then you've got more energy. Now you're making healthier food choices. Now you're motivated to go for a walk in the sunshine because you know Shemaine said this is going to help my metabolism and my hormones. And then before you know it, you're just feeling amazing. Before I just kind of move on from this, I actually started a new nurse who works in Foothills, and she has myopia that she said it runs in her family, and I don't doubt that it does, but just because something's genetic doesn't mean you have to get it. The biggest, as many people have heard the analogy, genetics is the bullet in the gun. Your environment and your lifestyle is what pulls the trigger. So just because you have a genetic predisposition doesn't mean you're going to get that same outcome. And I was explaining to her, because she's like, oh, I can't go out in the sun, I have to wear sunglasses, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, look, trust me on this. Like, I can give you the research. I know what I'm talking about. I, of course, prescribed her krill oil, and I was like, you need to go out in the sunlight, even start low, a minute or two, no sunglasses, and you need to get that direct sunlight in your eyes. And she's like, well, it does hurt my eyes, but I'll trust you. And I was like, yeah, just start slow and we can build up from that. And I need you to get your sun exposed, or your skin exposed to the sun. So, like, sunlight, it's not just, Shemaine says, get out there and get sun, I'll feel better. It's like, has this huge influence on us. Lastly, I suppose we are talking about sun now, or skin now, so we are moving through the body. Like, the krill oil also contains astaxanthin, which can act as a sunscreen and be very protective. And I really do think krill oil, because I've been so consistent with it for such a long time, it is why my skin is so good. And my skin is not dry, but it's not oily. It's just like, it's good skin. I heal very, very fast. And part of that is stem cells, which, believe it or not, you've all been doing stem cell work. You just mightn't be aware of it, but it's already integrated into what I teach you. So with your skin, we have these receptors on our skin that when the sunlight hits our skin, and provided you've got a good diet, now you start to generate more energy, which is, again, if you remember the post I did maybe a week or two ago about human photosynthesis and how it's a real thing. But it only happens if we're eating a lot of chlorophyll rich foods, so a lot of green foods, and we're getting that direct sunlight exposure, and then we have the mitigator in our DHA. So this is why your basic stack is the way it is like, what are these few supplements that are going to support us and help us do all these wonderful things? And of course you need fatty acids to make hormones as well. So as we move down, this all then is going to, this inflammation that started up here, because maybe you don't sleep well, or you have a really poor diet or lifestyle, or you're getting exposed to all this smoke and vaping, not to point fingers, you know who you are, all this stuff, smoking, you know who you are, all this stuff, it's starting here and it's just pushing its way down. And even just not sleeping is a stress. It pushes its way down. Then we get to our reproductive system. We start to see all these hormonal issues. We start to see a lot of cramps, blood clots around your period. What is that? It's inflammation. One way I explain these cramps is, especially where you have these cramps and then you see a lot of blood clots in the toilet around your period. The blood vessels are so small throughout your uterus, and as things are moving, you have these big blood clots moving around and trying to push here and there and squash in here and there, and as they move through the blood vessels and start to get detoxified and transported out the cervix and out the cervical canal, you're getting a lot of pain because the blood is so sticky and it's bigger and it's not viscous and it's not free flowing, and you have inflammation of the tissues, you have inflammation of the blood, you have inflammation of the follicular tubes, you have inflammation of the capillaries. Everything's just inflamed and it's trying to squash here and there, and you get all this pressure and cramping. Most of it is inflammation. That's why magnesium helps so much. That's even why vitamin B6 can help a lot, because it can just help kind of reduce the inflammation and relax the body. Okay, where am I on my list? Moving down, one caveat, because this is quite common as well, especially in people who do a lot of heavy leg days and heavy workouts. You can get a lot, because we're still in this area of the uterus, and I am aware of the time, you can get a lot of inflammation from heavy leg days, heavy leg presses, heavy squats, heavy deadlifts. Like, heavy workouts can cause a lot of inflammation in the lower pelvic region. Most of the time that's okay when you come to like the uterus health and stuff. It doesn't impact that too much, but what it can do is cause a lot of inflammation around the gastrointestinal tract. So you start to get a lot of IBD flares. You can get a flare of diverticulosis. I have from heavy leg days, believe it or not. You can get flares of ulcerative colitis. Your celiac can flare. Anything IBD, because of the amount of inflammation and pressure that heavy leg days put on the lower body, that can cause an IBS or IBD flare. But another thing not a lot of people are aware of, that inflammatory response can cause varicose veins. Varicose veins are not isolated to your legs. You can get varicose veins inside your vagina, so you won't be able to see them. A doctor could see them, but you won't be able to. So I might say, do you have any varicose veins? And I'm well aware of this. I'll say, do you have varicose veins? And people will say no, but they probably do. You can get varicose veins in your colon or your large intestines or at the entrance to your anus. What are they? We call them hemorrhoids. Those are varicose veins. You can pretty much get varicose veins anywhere under your arms and then, of course, on your legs. That really is the inflammation. That's inflammation. Maybe you're the type of person that has poor integrity of the tissues throughout their body, like I do. So I have varicose veins from when I was overweight because I didn't take care of myself. So my tissue, my veins, they weren't strong, they weren't resilient. Like, it's called not having good constitution. My tissue wasn't resilient. So I have the varicose veins, and they're here now, and I just have to be a bit more careful with inflammation and my inversion and my leg days and stuff like that. But again, this inflammation does all this. And I didn't mean for this video to be all about inflammation, but because it's the kind of biggest symptom and driving factor of a lot of issues, when you have varicose veins, obviously then you have compromised blood vessels, but then well, if I'm more sensitive to inflammation, that could leave me more sensitive to inflamed blood. That could potentially predispose me to more migraines, maybe heart issues, maybe menstrual issues. Then you look at like the feet. You can get varicose veins in your feet. A lot of people do. And then you get, does anyone know what plantar fasciitis is, or fallen arches? That's inflammation of the muscles on the bottom of the feet. So you get a lot of inflammation there. Then it's not so much that the arches fall, but they get so tight and tense, so inflamed, you get a lot of pain. If you lift up your foot, you might see little black and blue bruises. So this is tissue inflammation. So there's a lot that happens in the body. Everything influences the other. We're probably going to go over a minute or two, but not much longer after that. Hey, Carolyn, have to head out. Thank you. You're welcome. So one thing that I really want people to drive home. So we've kind of touched on every body part, and I said, I'm not going to go into full depth on everything. We did go pretty deep, but as you know, we'd be here hours if I kept going and going. Everything influences the other. Everything does. Any sort of stress on the body, inflammation, and stress can come from anywhere. Sleep, nutrition, viral particles, heavy workouts, overtraining, fasting too much, smoke, alcohol, everywhere. We're just getting bombarded everywhere. What can happen is one system goes off, and that then puts the other system off and the other system off. And now you don't have balance in the body, and people talk a lot about hormonal balance. Well, if everything's off balance, how can your hormones be in balance? If it's all off, how can anything be on, kind of thing. But one thing that comes up a lot is sorry, I'm thirsty from all this smoke and talking. One thing that comes up is I've noticed, and I've talked about this so much, and I've done podcasts on it, I've noticed not a lot of people understand how body fat influences the whole system. Body fat can influence your hormones. Body fat can throw off the whole hormonal balance. Body fat can cause estrogen dominance. Here's the thing, body fat is not just fat. It's not just a storage site for fat. Body fat, it pretty much is an organ in itself, and a lot of research will support this. A lot of doctors are aware of this. Your body fat, it's its own organ. Body fat makes its own hormones. It takes in hormones, but it also makes its own hormones. Body fat makes inflammatory cytokines, not myokines, so inflammatory molecules. Body fat also stores toxins, chemicals, heavy metals, fat soluble toxins, especially. Fat is its own endocrine organ. Body fat makes estrogen, and not the good estrogen, the bad estrogen that then Not only does that contribute to estrogen dominance because your body fat's making more estrogen, it also then is going to influence the good estrogen that we would naturally make through cycling and fertility and stuff. So body fat has a huge influence, and it blows my mind that some people will tell me, I want to get healthy, but I'm not worried about losing fat. And I'm like, well, you can't do, like, you have to do it. It has to be both. It has to be hand in hand. And yeah, there's exceptions, people who are underweight or already at their weight, but most people, like the majority of people, are not. The majority of people have a couple of pounds to lose, and even a couple of pounds is going to influence your hormones. But if you have excess body fat that's basically shooting out all these inflammatory molecules and excess hormones and toxins into your bloodstream, causing inflammation all the time, because fat cells, inflammatory molecules, they're very inflamed. Fat cells are basically on fire. What do you think is going to happen to your mental health if you have all this stuff happening? You have these fat cells that are giving you out bad hormones. They're spitting out inflammatory molecules. They're spitting out and causing your body to be more toxic. It's spitting out toxins and retaining toxins. So you're just toxic. You're inflamed. You've got a shit ton of bad hormones going around. What do you think is going to happen to your anxiety and your stress response? You might feel some days like you're losing your mind or you're going insane because, and it might just be because you've so much extra body fat, and maybe that body fat is very toxic. Some people can have extra body fat and maybe they eat very clean, but they just eat too much, like too many calories or whatever, but it's clean food. So maybe their fat cells are not so toxic. But people who have a lot of extra weight and their diet is a lot more toxic, or their lifestyle, you can bet your bottoms that they have a lot of mental health and anxiety issues for sure. And I know people don't want to hear it, but this is biology. And that's where even looking like our fat soluble molecules, your vitamin A, your vitamin D, your vitamin E, where do they get stored mostly? What are they good for? Well, they get stored in the fat. They're best for fatty tissue like our brains and our eyes and even our skins, our joints, our synovial fluid, like, just to help you put it all in context. So everything influences everything. If you have a lot of extra body fat, it's going to throw your hormones off. It's going to make you feel like you're insane. You're going to have even a lot of tension and stress in your body because you've all these toxic chemicals being shot out from your fat cells. So I hope that makes sense. I really do. I'm going to give you all a few minutes to if you've any questions before we go, we'll take a few minutes. I'll read any questions. I had wrote down, how does tummy fat affect health? I think I've spoke about that. Cardiovascular disease, fatty liver, pancreatitis, gallbladder issues, even gout. What does a round or harder stomach tell us about health? Well, it basically tells us that you have either a lot of stress or in a crappy diet, or you have a lot of visceral fat. So you are predisposed to further immune issues down, or further health issues down the line. So let's see. And it can be a question about anything. It doesn't have to just be what I've spoke about. So it can be about anything. Let's see, did I miss anything? I went through the lymphatic system, body fat, liver, kidneys, leg and feet issues. Cracked heels, most people don't know this, but cracked heels is not just dry skin. Cracked heels can be a real indicator of insulin resistance. A lot of diabetics will have very bad feet and cracked heels. I think many people know that, but when they see like your average cracked heel, they don't immediately say, oh, she's got insulin resistance. Cracked heels can also be a sign of thyroid issues as well. Isn't that interesting? Of course, you know what most people know about fungus in the toenails and on the feet and bacteria issues, kind of that you've got toxic overload in the body and an abundance of pathogens. How long should the television be turned off before bed? 24 hours. Never watch TV. Look, the recommended time in the research is 90 minutes. 90 minutes is where we start to see an influence on melatonin. I'm generous and I generally say 30 to 60 minutes. If you can do 60 minutes, great. Honestly, like I know, I'm well aware of what life is like. Wrapping up business stuff, getting kids to bed, I'm well aware of it. All I can say is I'm too busy in the evening to watch TV. And then if I could watch TV, I'm too tired to do that. But the research shows us 90 minutes. I generally say 30 to 60 minutes is a good target. Any other questions? Sure, Janelle, when you turn off your TV, especially with your back, you should be having your bath. You should be doing your anti-inflammatory stuff. Like, you can't watch TV in the bath. I hope not. I've been in some hotel rooms where they have a TV in the bathroom, and as fancy as it is, I'm like, what the fuck? I can't imagine myself watching TV in the bath. Apart from I'd be afraid I'd get electrocuted or something. Anything else? We've got time for another one or two. I did want to mention while you're typing, I did have here, what are spasms, palpitations, numbness, and tingling? And I had wrote, and the adrenals, like what have they all got in common? Anything that spasms or cramps or misses a beat, palpitations, any kind of eye flickering, twitching anywhere, that generally is a sign of a magnesium deficiency. Any sort of numbness or tingling, apart from if you slept on your arm wrong, but if you notice like driving, your arm goes numb, or holding a cup or your phone, you start getting numbness or tingling, not including inversion. That generally is a B vitamin deficiency. So we have a magnesium deficiency and a B vitamin deficiency. Now, how does that connect to the adrenals? Most of you know this, but just a refresher to kind of wrap up how everything influences the other. When you're very, very stressed, whatever the stress is, you burn through, and again, that could just be anxiety, you burn through your magnesium first and then your B vitamins. This is how the adrenals work. So then once you have a lot of stress, you've depleted these two. So now you start to get all these different symptoms. Most people kind of recognize, well, I only get heart palpitations or my eyelid only twitches during very stressful time. Yeah, because you've depleted your magnesium. So everything influences everything. Okay, that's it. I think we've covered everything. As always, if you've any more questions, put them in the comments. I'll keep an eye out. I think this was pretty good. I think this one will go up on YouTube. I don't like to share all the group calls, but ones that I think this is going to benefit everyone, I put on YouTube so you can share with your friends or your family or whatever. Like, I put it up publicly. There's a few I've uploaded that are private. If you want the links, I will give you the links. But this one I think will go public. Kind of just, we didn't go into anything too specific to the masters, but it was more helping you understand the influences on the body. Everything influences the other. The adrenals directly influence the thyroid influences the adrenals, the brain influences the thyroid, the brain influences the adrenals, the brain influences your menstrual cycle. If your brain's not getting sleep and working properly, everything's going to be off. So everything influences everything. Even if you just whack your knee off the table, that's going to be a stress response. That's going to elicit some immune action to happen there. Maybe you will cry if it was very sore. Like, everything influences everything. Okay, we'll leave it at that. I'm glad you liked it. Go have your bath. Jennifer, I'm glad you stayed on. Okay, girls, I'll speak to you in the morning. Goodbye.